Well, we are on page 143 actually. We were reading about the mantra 6, verse 6, which in the translation here, but he who sees everywhere the self in all existences and all existences in the self shrinks not thereafter from aught. So we have been reading the beautiful explanation of this verse, and in our previous classes it was basically on page 137, starting with, of course, 136. We dealt with this verse. Actually, if I were to say what's really the central verse of this Isha Upanishad, maybe this could be called as the essence of the Vedantic philosophy, the very essence, and which has been expanded into other verses in other whole of other Upanishads. But this is really the crux. He who sees everywhere the self in all existences, that's number one, and all existences in the self. These are the two facets. One sees the self in all existences and all existences in the self. So this is explained at great length by Sri Aurobindo, which I will not get back into, but it might be good if you can read it once again on page 136 and 37. And the crux of that was this sentence. I read out from page 137 toward the bottom of the page. Everything, therefore, which removes even partially the sense of difference and helps towards the final unity, brings with it a touch of bliss by a partial oblivion of pain. But that which brings you bliss, you cannot help but delight in ecstatically, you cannot help but love. If therefore you see yourself in another, you spontaneously love that other, for in yourself you must delight. If you see yourself in all creatures, you cannot but love all creatures. Universal love is the inevitable consequence of the realization of the one in many. And with universal love, how shall any shred of hate, disgust, dislike, loathing exist? So this is the consequence, that any movement that brings you partially towards unity takes you towards bliss. And any touch of bliss automatically ends in love. So the question of universal love or loving humanity comes only from a movement of unity. That means unity, not what we speak of, political unity and all that kind of thing, but unity in the self. So we have to go back to see all creatures in the self and see yourself in all creatures. This is what we mean by unity. So unity has nothing to do on the emotion. Well, it could be partial expressions. Then we say emotionally one feels one with the others, intellectually one feels one with the others, and on the vital level one can have unity. But all these are outer and temporal expressions of the real unity. But there are two things which you have noted perhaps. One is to see all creatures in the self. Second is to see yourself in all creatures. That's Sri Aurobindo has explained very beautifully why both of them are required. But this is the message that we get, that love, the universal love, call it the divine love, you get only by moving towards unity. Union, even the smallest movement of unity creates love. What we think is normally it's love that creates unity is on the contrary. It is a movement towards unity that brings the gesture of love. So depending on what level you are approaching unity, on that level is the expression of your love. So having said that, then we move to on page 142, because speaking about this unity, Sri Aurobindo does talk on page 141 something about the Christian ideal of the united family. The Christianity largely spoke of the united family. But then in India, in our Shastras, in our Vedanta, we have the word Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So he is saying that this Christian ideal or the Western ideal of the united family, how far will it be realizable? So we are taken back to the ideal of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, where the Guru says, very noble, and we have it among ourselves in a noble couplet, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but everything which implies difference is based upon avidya and the inevitable fruits of avidya. Have you ever watched a big united family, a joint family in Bengal, especially in days when the Aryan discipline is lost? Behind its outward show of strength and unity, what jarring, what dissensions, what petty malice and hatred, what envy and covetousness, and then finally one day a crash, a war, a case in the law courts, a separation forever. Well, we have done this, we have read this paragraph, but this is only to show us that just an ideal of an external world, united family, is not sufficient. Because it gives us the example of the Bengali joint family, which apparently is all good in the beginning, but slowly the dissensions, the jealousies and all that, they come up, and one day it breaks because it doesn't have the real unity in the self. So what he's comparing to is that, as he says here, the Europeans attach too much importance to the body, shrink too much from physical sin, and are far too much at their ease with mental sin, etc. In the sense, the thinking that external unity is sufficient. But Sri Aurobindo says that doesn't last. It ends up in war. It may suspend for a while all the warfare, but he says that doesn't last. So the only solution is what he says here, when all mankind has realized that it is one self. That's what, if you have, some of you might have read this ideal of human unity, where he speaks of the religion of humanity. So that's precisely the same word, although he uses a word religion there, but the meaning is the same, that when all mankind has realized that it is one self, nor can that be until mankind has realized that all existence is one self. For if an united humanity tyrannize over bird and beast and insect, the atmosphere of pain, hatred and fear, breathing up from the lower creation, will infect and soil the purity of the upper. So we cannot be talking about European unity and subconscious unity while we are harming nature, killing birds and killing animals, killing this environment. He says that will not work. The law of karma is inexorable, and whatever you deal out to others, even such shall be the effect on yourself in this life or in another. Do you think then that this strange thing will ever happen, will ever come about, that mankind in general will ever come to see in the dog and the vulture, nay, in the snake that bites and the scorpion that stings, their own self, that they will say unto death, my brother, and to destruction, my sister, nay, that they will know these things as themselves? Sarva bhuteshu chatmanam, the Shruti will not spare you the meanest insect that crawls or the foulest worm that writes. So the Shruti, the Isha Upanishad, the Vedanta comes out very strong. There is no exception. You cannot have human unity while destroying nature. It is going to rebound. One day the karma that you have accrued will rebound on humanity, on the individual or the collectivity. Because the verse that we have is Sarva Bhuteshu Chatmanam. Every little insect and crawling living thing has to be part of that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So this is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, is not just the family of the Vasudhaiva or the Krishna or the divine, but it is the family of the entire created creatures. So there's no distinction between a worm and a snake and a lion and an elephant and a man. It has to be a unity of all. So we are read till there, and then I take you to page 145, which is the verse number 7. Now coming to the 7th verse, which is a little different, but basically an extension of the 6th verse, which says, Yasmin sarvani bhutani atmaiva bhut vijanata tatra ko moha ka shoka ekatvam anupashyataha. Because here the most beautiful line that you see are the second line, tatra ko moha ka shoka, when it says ekatvam anupashyata. It's the same vision of this number 6, that when you see this oneness, when you see this self in all things, says how can there be any kind of an illusion, shoka, or any other kind of a delusion? So all the sorrows and sufferings, all that will vanish if you have that vision of unity. So where the word says Yasmin, in the situation, Sarvani is of course all, Bhutani is living entities, Atma, the spiritual spark, Eva is only, Abhut exists as, Vijanata, a one who knows, Tatra therein, Ka what, Moha illusion, Ka what, Shoka is anxiety, Ekatvam oneness in quality, Anupashyataha, a one who sees through authority, or one who sees constantly like that. But this is not shown in this exact word. This is by Isha Upanishad by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. But the Sanskrit is more or less close to, but Shravanda may interpret it a little differently. We will see how he does. But that was only to give you the verse explanation. But on page 145, Shravanda takes up verse 7. He says, He who discerneth, in whom all creatures have become himself, how shall he be deluded? When shall he have sorrow, in whose eyes all things are one? You can see Sri Aurobindo has taken shoka as sorrow, whereas Bhaktivedanta takes it as anxiety. So that is the realization of the mighty ideal, the moral and practical result of perfected Vedanta, that in us all things will become ourselves. There, says the Shruti, in the man whose self has become all creatures, what delusion can there be, or what sorrow? For wherever he looks, anupashyataha, he sees nothing but the great oneness, nothing but God, nothing but his own self of love and bliss. Delusion, moha, is the mistaking of the appearance for the reality, bewilderment by the force of maya. This house that my fathers had was mine, and alas, I have lost it. This was my wife whom I loved, and she is lost to me forever. Alas, how has my son disappointed me, from whom I hoped so much. This office for which I hoped and schemed, my rival, the man I hated, has got it. All these are utterances of delusion, and the result of delusion is shoka, sorrow. But to one whose self has become all creatures, there can be no delusion and therefore no sorrow. He does not say, I, Devadatta, have lost this house. What a calamity! He says, I, Devadatta, have lost this house, but it has gone to me, Harishchandra. That is fortunate. I can lose nothing except to myself. Nor shall I weep because my wife is dead and lost, who is not lost at all, but as near to me as ever, since she is still myself, in myself, with myself, as much after death as when her body was underneath my hands. I cannot lose myself. My son has disappointed me. He has taken his own way and not mine. But he has not disappointed himself. Who is myself? He has only disappointed the sheath, the case, the mental cell in which I was imprisoned. The vision of the one self dispels all differences. An infinite calm, an infinite love, an infinite charity, an infinite tolerance is the very nature of the strong soul that has seen God. You see, he has given us some practical examples of one who is in delusion, and the delusion is the mistaking of the appearance for the reality. So if we think that this division, that this death, this ownership of the house, etc., etc., if you think that they are the reality, if I take this appearance to be the reality, then obviously I'll be in shoka, I'll be in sorrow. So the Vedanta's methodology, you can see, is to see oneself in all and all in oneself. So by that is the Vidya actually. The Vidya is that which sees all as united, all as one in the self. But avidya is that which sees all as separate. So he says that avidya, if we follow, obviously there is shoka. So there is no other way to come out of this shoka or this dukkha or this sorrow and this anxiety, what's been called, except to change our vision of looking at things. And that vision is the vision of oneness, is the vision of seeing the self in all things and all things in oneself. So he has given us practical examples, but you see, even the very words when he says, the son has disappointed me, he has taken his own way and not mine. You see, when the son or the children disappoint you, what's the attitude? He says, no, he has not disappointed himself. Who is myself? He has only disappointed the sheath, the case, the mental cell in which I was imprisoned. So I had a kind of a mindset, I had a kind of an expectation, which has been disappointed. But actually, I am not this mind sheath, I am not this cells, I am not, as he calls, the sheath or the case. So you see, the whole thing goes back to what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have again and again brought back to us, that this, what is the reality? Who is real? As Raman Maharishi all the time asked us to see, who am I? So the entire philosophies of Vedanta swerves around a single question, who am I? If I say I am the mind, I am the body, I am the vital, I am the emotions, then accordingly you will have the suffering, the relations, this shoka. But when you say that I is not this body, this sheath, this case, this mental cell, then you will have an equivalent bliss, equivalent relation of enjoyment. So the whole thing is that we are under this avidya, constantly accepting this division, and therefore all this question of the sin, the stain, the disease, the foulness of the world cannot pollute his mind, nor repel his sympathy, as he stoops to lift the sinner from the dung heap in which he wallows. He does not shrink from the ordure that stains his own hands. His eyes are not bedimmed by tears when he lifts up the shrieking sufferer out of his pit of pain. He lifts him as a father lifts his child who has tumbled in the mire and is crying. The child chooses to think he is hurt and cries. The father knows he is not really hurt, therefore he does not grieve, but neither does he chide him. Rather he lifts him up and soothes the willful imaginary pain. Such a soul has become God, mighty and loving to help and save, not weak to weep and increase the ocean of human tears with his own. Buddha did not weep when he saw the suffering of the world. He went forth to save. And surely such a soul will not grieve over the buffets the outward world seems to give to his outward self. For how can he grieve who is still all this universe? The pain of his petty personal self is no more to his consciousness than the pain of a crushed ant to a king as he walks musing in his garden, bearing on his shoulders the destiny of nations. He cannot feel sorrow for himself even if he would, for he has the sorrow of a whole world to relieve. His own joy is nothing to him, for he has the joy of the whole universe at his command. Well, what Aurobindo has very poetically described here is the essential experience of most of these yogis, call it Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, or even the mother in that little childhood. She would have tears in her eyes, and when her mother asks, "Why are you having tears?" she says, "I feel the weight of the whole world on me." But it's not the tears of sorrow and pain. As he puts it here, is the sympathy, it's kind of, expressing that she has a work to do. So actually, you may see the life of Sri Ramakrishna or Vivekananda or any of these great yogis. They're not touched by sorrow, even if you go and weep at their feet and say, "I'm in this sorrow, I'm in this problem." Well, we have seen the case with the mother. She never had tears in her eyes for you saying, "Oh my God, you're suffering so much," and all that. Because they see this whole image. And as he puts it very beautifully, the child who falls, he thinks he has got hurt. But their father, he says, "No, you're not really hurt, son. It's only a little bit of dust on your knee. It's not there." But we, the child, would like to imagine that he is hurt and have a wailing and says, "No, I'm hurt, I want this and that." So the yogi or the rishi or the divine Purusha, he does not have this weeping of the human beings. Because they have, first of all, you can see now, it's very clear from the Vedanta point of view, they have unity, bliss and love. So when the mother herself tells us, you see, that I know you better because I am you. It's a very simple thing, but now we understand the meaning of that I am you, you are in me and I am in you. By that fact, what does it mean? That she is living in a constant bliss and love. So for her, when we go weeping, it doesn't touch her. Because she is in the bliss of union. And therefore she has that eternal love in every word she spoke. There is always the love and what we say, dusma, sweetness and all that. All these are basically, now understand very philosophically, when she says, all that sweetness and love is but that I know you better because I am you. That I am you is that absolute fundamental unity. There was another saying also, she says, "Go deep inside the temple and I am within." That psychic being, what we call over the great psychic being, nothing but the mother again. So when there is this absolute inalienable unity, then what do you expect them to be? So when they speak, there's joy, there is sweetness, there is love. It's not a mental makeup. It's their automatic stand of their consciousness. So you see, we can understand now how these spiritual beings, they act. May it be any great spiritual person. The essence of that is always the joy. I mean, on a very so-called simple human level also, we have seen that with Nolinida, I've seen that with Champaklalji, and even why our famous Dada, Pranabda. I mean, Deepshika and myself would many a time discuss this as, Dada is in perennial in happiness, Whenever we went, how are you, Dada? Is always, happy mood, joyous mood. There's hardly any pain as such, because wherever and you get that sense of the unity, it is always followed by bliss and love. Either or, of course, Aurobindo logically explains saying, unity brings bliss, and whatever brings bliss you cannot but love. If this gives you joy, I cannot hate it, I cannot crush it. So logically, whatever gives you delight, you love it. You say, I want to have ice cream. Why? Because simple thing is I want to have ice cream and chocolate because it gives me bliss, it gives me delight of taste. And says, I love chocolate. Why do you love? Because it gives you the joy. So there is the element of joy inevitably leads to love. So this is, I suppose, the fundamental nature of the existence of these rishis. The unity, bliss and love. So that's what Aurobindo is again explaining. Buddha did not weep when he saw the suffering of the world. He went forth to save. This is a very simple sentence, and of course he has taken lots of examples of Buddha here because of his, I think, that essential unity. And there is no question of Buddha not being one with the divine or Brahman. He did not speak about it. That's what he says. He did not weep or speak about it. He straight went to action to save, to serve, and that too out of his great love. That's why Buddha is known for his compassion. And now we know where does compassion come from. Compassion is bliss and bliss is unity. So what he realized was that universal oneness with the divine. What we call the great enlightenment. These are all Buddhist terminology, but from our integral point of view or Vedantic point of view, it must have been the realization of the union with the divine, with the Brahman. And from there came out his compassion, his joy, his selflessness to save mankind. After that, there is a beautiful passage on page 146, but I'm afraid that takes a bit deeper, and I would like to jump to page 148. The student. But how many will accept the ideal when there are so many easier ideals to give them strength and comfort? But the student, of course, you can see is a practical person, and he says, all these great ideals of the Vedanta are good to hear, but why should we go for these hi-fi ideals? We have smaller ones, closer ones, easier ones at home, in hand. So he says, why should we, when there are so many easier ideals to give them strength and comfort? The Guru. But are those ideals true? Delusions may give you strength and comfort for a while, but after all, they break down and leave you tumbling through chaos. Truth alone is the sure and everlasting rock of rest. The whole universe rests upon truth, on the is, not on the is not. To be comfortable in delusion is the nature of man in his tamasic covering of gross matter stuff. It is the business of philosophy and religion to dispel his delusion and force him to face the truth. This is a very interesting conversation that now takes and very relevant to our present decade, present life. The student, but many wise men are of the opinion that these smaller ideals are the truth, not religion and philosophy, which are a delusion. All the hi-fi services we don't want. This. Tell me one of those newborn truths that profess to dispel the knowledge that is without end and without beginning. For you know more of the science of the West than I, the student. There is the doctrine of the greatest good of the greatest number, which has something finite, certain and attainable about it. Nothing metaphysical, nothing abstract. See, we have come to this utilitarian philosophy which most of us would know. So he said, this is something, greatest good of the greatest number. So that is a doctrine that is very useful and attainable, the Guru. We have heard something about it in this country, a system of morality by arithmetic called utilitarianism, which would have man pass his life with a pair of scales in his hand, weighing a good and evil. It did good in its time, but it was not true and could not last. The student, in what is it not true? In what is it not true? The Guru. It is not true because it is not in human nature. No human being ever made or ever will make an arithmetical calculation of pain and pleasure to result from an action and the numbers of the people diversely affected by them before doing the action. This sort of ethical algebra, this system of moral accounts, needs a different planet for its development. A qualified accountant has yet to be born on the human plane. You cannot assess pleasure and pain, good and evil, in so many ounces and pounds. Human feelings, abstract emotions are elusive and variable from moment to moment. So you can see, Aurobindo or the Guru is arguing about the greatest good and the greatest evil. He says, how are you going to really compare? How are you going to assess that this is the good is so many lakhs and the evil is so many lakhs? Which is better? And then how many people? Even if I take one action, can I assess that out of the class of 10 people, 6 will be having good result and 4? It's not possible. Why? There's so many complications, because all the 10 of you have different. It says somewhere, this is the human being is such a composite of complications. You may be happy on the vital level, you may be happy on the physical level, you may be happy on the mental level. So there are different kinds of pleasures, different kinds of what he calls the good. So he says that's not possible. Now he comes to the directly, utilitarianism with all its appearance of extreme practicality and definiteness is really empty of any definite truth and impotent to give any sound and helpful guidance. It is in itself as barren of light as of inspiration, a creed arid, dry and lifeless, and what is worse, false. Now I'm expected to see the management master to have a little smile on his face, to see all these utilitarian principles of management. He would say it is in itself as barren of light as of inspiration, a creed dry, dull, dry and lifeless, and what is worse, false. Whatever it has of value, it has copied or rather caricatured from altruism. It gives us standards of weight and measure which are utterly impossible to fix, and it fails to provide any philosophical justification for self-sacrifice nor any ardent inspiration towards it. Utilitarian hedonism, is not that the phrase, suggests, I think, that by doing good to others, we really provide a rarer and deeper pleasure for ourselves than any purely self-limited gratification give us. Now he is coming to the meaning of what is the maximum goodness. He says maximum goodness is nothing but the maximum pleasure for you, maximum benefit for you, not the goodness for others. But how much pleasure and benefit are you accruing? So this question of the goodness for others is a false altruism. So he's saying utilitarian hedonism suggests that by doing good to others, we really provide a rarer and deeper pleasure for ourselves. Most true, and a truth we need not learn from either hedonist or utilitarian. The Buddhists knew it, that means to do good to others gives it joy. The Buddhists knew it 2000 years ago, and the Aryans of India practiced it before that. The whole life of Sri Krishna was a busy working for the good of others, of his friends, his country and the world. And Sri Krishna never knew grief or pain. Now this is before this, what is the philosopher? Bentham, is it? The philosopher of utilitarianism? American philosopher? I forget his name, maybe Bentham. We'll have to check up. So what Aurobindo is telling us, before the West got this philosophy of utilitarianism, long back Buddha said, long before that the Aryans said, and even Krishna practiced it. And Krishna is that wonderful example because he was all the time doing good to others. He never suffered. He had no pain. And now this is the next one, is a very nice sentence. There are three kinds of pleasure to be had from charity and beneficence. So this is again, the ideal of doing good to others, help thy neighbor and all that. What kind? He said there are three kinds of pleasure. First, there is a satisfaction of vanity, the vanity of hearing oneself praised, the vanity of feeling how very good I am. This is the vanity, where we put our names in the temple and we say, I've given this much money to Maksiman, they put my slab there. That's the vanity of my name. So he says, how very good I am. This, I think, is at the bottom of much charity in India and more in Europe. And it is here that hedonism comes most into play, but it is a poor spring and will break down under any strain. It may lead to charity but never to self-sacrifice. Then there is the joy of having done, second one. Then there is the joy of having done a good work and brought oneself nearer to heaven, which used to be and perhaps still is the most common incentive to beneficence in Arya land. Swarg mein jana hai, go to heaven, you do this punya, and what is the thing that you go to heaven? So the lowest one is you have the pleasure of your vanity, that my name, the pride of the family, the Reddy family is doing this, the Chaturvedi family is doing, the family, the individual. Second one is if I do a little good, then I have a seat booked there up in heaven. That's a more powerful spring, but it is narrow and does not reach the true self. Its best value is that it is helpful towards purification. Third one, then there are the natures born for love and unselfishness, who in the mere joy of helping others, of suffering for others, of seeing the joy return to tear-worn faces and pain-dimmed eyes, feel the bliss that comes from the upsurging of the God within. Well, this is, of course, the saints. We have the famous saint Mother Teresa, helping the poor and getting the joys, not just helping out of sympathy. See, this is I think we have to distinguish a little bit, helping out of sympathy or helping out of what Aurobindo calls here, that a bliss that comes from the upsurging of God within. So this is what Buddhism has, this is what people like we have got seen in our own lifetime. The saints, the Christian saints, and of course in India we have great yogis. But this question of that you are helping the others because you see the Godhead within others, because you see the divinity within others. So that brings not just a sympathy of love, I'm doing good to you, but it is the bliss of identity, what we call. So that is a very high reach, where people, of course, Vivekananda is one of them, but we can see Vivekananda also suffered for it. So then we see the hedonistic element in utilitarianism is an imperfect and blundering effort to grope for a great truth which it has neither been able to grasp itself nor set forth with scientific accuracy. That truth is found only in the clear and luminous teaching of the Vedanta. It is this, that the compound result we call man is a compound result and not the single, simple, homogeneous being our senses would believe. He is composed of several elements, corporeal, vital, mental, intellectual and essential, and his true self is none of these heterogeneous factors of the element the self lives in, but something beyond and transcendent. Pain and pleasure, good and evil, are therefore not permanent and definite entities. The former are a heterogeneous conglomeration, sometimes a warring agglomeration of the feelings and impulses belonging to the various husks in which the true self is wrapped. Well, I'm not stopping that. Aurobindo himself is going to explain Good and evil are relative and depend on the standpoint we take with reference to the true locality of self in this little cosmos of man. Now this is an explanation we should look into. Good and evil are relative and depend on the standpoint we take with reference to the true locality. What's the meaning of true locality of the self? Where do we locate this self? You see, in youth, the self is the body. We locate the self, my being, my soul, in my body. That's why for the youth, the body is all. Is looking into the mirror and saying, I'm the handsomest man, I'm this, I'm capable. All the confidence they have is in the body because they locate the self in the body at that time. They don't see the self in the mind or in the heart or in its region. They say, I am the body. It's as if the soul is saying, I am the body. So that is why there's so much of exuberation, so much of confidence, so much of strength that I can do. Because there's the strength of the soul, the self behind. So there is a location. So depending on that is also the good and the evil. If we locate that self low down, our good will be a poor thing, of the earthy, little distinguishable from evil. You see, if the self is located in the body, then the good and evil, the good that you get is very low, very temporary, as it says, just distinguishable from evil. It's not evil, just a little better than evil. But that is because you have put the self on the lowest level of the body. If we locate it in its true place, our good will be as high, vast and pure as the heavens. All pain and pleasure, all good and evil, have their birth, their existence and their end in the self. It follows therefore that even the highest love and altruism are bounded by the self. Altruism is not the sacrifice of self to others, but the sacrifice of our false self to our true self, which unless we are yogins, we can best see in others. This is for the first time we see a beautiful definition. Altruism is not the sacrifice of self to others, but the sacrifice of our false self to our true self. So that is why we, Sri Aurobindo Mother, have not much spoken about altruism, because we always take it to be this kind of a sacrifice for the sake of the others. I'm giving money, I'm giving this. It's a kind of a sense of sacrifice, but that brings in a false ego. But if it can be done from the sacrifice of the false ego to our true self, that means we are detached. We do not think that I have the role when I'm helping somebody, when I'm giving somebody. This I feeling is not there. That means what? Our false self is giving in to the true self. That this is kind of saying, I am the self, I have the Atman, I have the soul. There's a self and Atman in her. I give to the another self. I'm not giving it to another human being in pain and poverty, etc. So if we can take the angle of self giving to another form of the self, that is where the ego will not come in. Otherwise, in every form, the false ego comes in. True love is not the love of others, but the love of ourself. For we cannot possibly love what is not ourself. If we love what is not ourself, it must be as a result of contact. This is a very beautiful logic, True love is not the love of others, but the love of ourself. For we cannot possibly love what is not ourself. If we love what is not ourselves, it must be as a result of contact. But we cannot love by sparsha, by mere contact, because contact is temporary in its nature and in its results, and cannot give rise to a permanent feeling such as love. If the logic is, you can see that if I love this flower, then that means there is this contact, sparsha. There is a contact by eye, by hand, by ear, by, and whatever I love by contact is temporary. So it's only when you love something as part of your greatest self, without the utility or use of the senses, that would be more permanent. So anything dependent on the senses is temporary. So he says, because contact is temporary. Yajnavalkya well said, we desire the wife not for the sake of the wife but for the sake of the self. Only if we mistake things for the self which are not the true self, we shall as a result mistake things for love which are not real love. If we mistake the food husk for self, we shall desire the wife for corporeal gratification. If we mistake the vital emotion husk for self, we shall desire the wife for emotional gratification. If we mistake the mind husk for the self, we shall desire the wife for aesthetic gratification and the pleasure sense of her presence, her voice, looks, etc. about the house. If we mistake the intellectual husk for the self, we shall desire the wife for her qualities and virtues, her capacities and her mental gifts for the gratification of the understanding. If we see the self in the bliss sheath where the element of error reaches the vanishing point, we shall then desire the wife for the gratification of the true self, the bliss of the sense of union, of becoming one. And if we have seen and understood our true self without husk or covering, we shall not desire her at all, because we shall possess her. We shall know that she is already our self and therefore not to be desired in her sheaths. Since she is already possessed, it follows that the more inward the sheath with which we confuse the self, the purer the pleasure, the more exalted the conception of good, until in the real naked self we rise beyond good and evil, because we have no longer any need of good or any temptation to evil. Pleasure, emotional pleasure, is higher than corporeal, aesthetic than emotional, intellectual than aesthetic, ethical than intellectual, spiritual than ethical. This is the whole truth and the whole philosophy of ethics. All else is practical arrangement and balancing of forces, economizing of energies for the purposes of social stability or some other important but impermanent end. So again, as we have seen the same example that he gives in another context, that you see the relations depend so much on what we say. He has given the example of the wife on different levels, that if you mistake the self, if you mistake the food husk, that is the external physical husk, we shall desire the wife or whatever. I mean, the gist of it is, it depends where you are stationed in your consciousness. If you are stationed in the physical, you will accrue the physical pleasure, not just the wife, but with the world, with any relation. He is giving because he has given the example of wife because he has started taking the example of Yajnavalkya. So, where are you stationed in your consciousness? Is it the vital? Then the vital pleasure. The mental, the physical, the physical. Then there is the bliss sheath, the inner sheath, then you have the inner thing. But there, if you have the identity with the transcendental divine, then you don't even seek to possess her. We don't need to have any kind of a possession of any human being, because then we see me in all and all in me. So the whole relationship of the individual changes, saying, is Brahman in one form versus the Brahman in another form. So there is no relationship of wanting, possessing, desiring. You're not expecting any kind of a result out of your relation. It is there. He puts it in the last sentence, that since she is already possessed, that means that other person is part of you and you are a part of that. There's no two, there's no what we say, the two forms. It's only a single consciousness in two forms. So, in essence, what we see, what the verse 7, of course, it goes further, but it gets a little into social thought and bit of Christianity and all that is coming. So I'm not wanting to go into that, because he has explained a lot about the modern philosophers, and so as we are looking at the Vedantic thing, to sum up, this kind of a thing, basically, as a verse number 6 said, that you see the self in all in the self. That is verse number 6. Then if you see, as you see in the verse number 7, that if you perceive the unity in all, then there is no delusion, and where there is no delusion, there is no shoka, there is no sorrow. So this perception of the unity in all is what is important, and this perception of the unity can be on any level, because man is a composite being, and this unity can be different tiers, layers, and your relation with the world, with the material world, with the physical objects, with the people, depends on the state of your consciousness, which he calls the self, but in our language, in Aurobindonian language, we will say the level of our consciousness. So let us not grumble saying we have no relations with these people, with the children, we have these tensions, etc. Because it is not anybody else to be blamed, it is I myself am to be blamed, because it depends on what level is my consciousness. The response you get is exactly corresponding to your own level of consciousness. So if you raise your consciousness, you will get the same result, because the other person also has the same mental, vital. In fact, it may happen that the other person wants to pull you down into the lower consciousness. That could be the imbalance where the relation will not last. Because at least if there is an equivalence of relation, intellectual versus intellectual, mental versus mental, aesthetic versus aesthetic, spiritual versus spiritual, it's a greater, more lasting relation. So if there is a complete imbalance or cross between this, then it does not rule. So we have 6 and 7 which go together actually, and then we have the 8th, which turns again a bit into, only number 8 is it is a kind of a philosophy in itself. It's a very broad philosophy when we come into the question of the 3 levels of the Brahman, Virat Purusha, etc. That stands on its own. From there we have 9, 10, 11, 12. They make a set. That's the most intellectually, philosophically, the most interesting ones. 9, 10, 11, 12. So there is a small grouping that can be done. So we will leave it at that. We have done 6 and 7. 8 we will take up next time, and we will proceed. So as you can see, I am not really going through the whole text, but really selecting passages which keep up the link of the philosophy. Sri Aurobindo has given lots of other philosophers, but which require a deeper study of social thought and all that.